Welcome to a special crossover episode of the XrmToolCast on the CRM MVP Podcast. My name is Daryl and I'm excited for this dual podcast episode. So what is a dual podcast episode? Well, this is going to be the same exact podcast episode dropping as episode 65 of the CRM MVP Podcast, as well as episode 16 of the XrmToolCast. If you are a normal CRM MVP podcast subscriber and have never listened to the XrmToolCast, it's a podcast that fellow MVP Jonas Rapp and I started, focusing on tools for the CRM/CDS/PowerApps platform. Since Jonas and I are both developers, we do some dev-heavy episodes, but I have started giving an overview of each episode, so in 30 seconds or less of listening, you should know if the rest of the episode applies to you. For XrmToolCast listeners, the CRM MVP podcast was created by fellow MVP Gus Gonzalez. It covers a wide range of topics and has many hosts, but they are always an MVP, so you know it's always going to be good. So, welcome to episode 65 of the CRM MVP podcast and episode 16 of the XrmToolCast. In this episode, we interview Matt Barbour, the principal platform architect of the Power Platform. Matt talks through the PowerApps command line utility and Microsoft's focus on command line first. He also shares updates on the status of the Visual Studio Dev Toolkit, new features that have been added to the Data Configuration Migration tool, changes to the CRM/CDS SDK that may break your logins, and the status of the .NET Core SDK. Be sure to listen to the very end when Matt gives out his super secret Microsoft email address on air. So, let's go ahead and get started.
So we are here at the CRM UG Summit, or the UG PowerApps Summit. I don't know what name, but there's like 4 or 5 different names for it. But the Dynamics Community's summit event here in Florida, in Orlando. And we managed to corner our good friend, Matt Barbour. Matt, welcome to the show again.
How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. Doing good. It's been a fun couple days here at the conference. Got a couple days more to go, but yeah, a lot of fun meeting people and being able to see what's going on in the community. So,
yep.
So last time we talked through some tools that we've created, and since we've talked, I know there's been some tools that Microsoft has gone through and published as well. And there are some things that are happening that developers in particular need to be aware of when it comes to some tools that, or some things that we use by default, or some are using maybe incorrectly. So why don't we start with some tools? So I know we have the new command line utilities. So what are those, and who would be using those?
Yeah, so that's the PowerApps command line utility. That is something that we released in preview, and we've just GA'd one part of it. That is a harness. That's a good way to describe that. It's a harnessing utility. So it has several different modules. One of which we've released publicly, one of which that we'd like to get out and preview real soon. So what you use it for today is creating PowerApps component framework controls. So it allows you to stamp out the actual project type, get all the dependencies that you need into it, do some compiling, do some testing. It's got that component, those components built into it. It'll help you with publishing and getting that deployed up to the remote host. Or in this case, the CDS environment. It is the first component that we've shipped. So, but we also have in the wings things like plugin templates, things like what we're referring to as the general CDS project type that allows us to do things like schema management and some other things, similar to what we used to have in the developer toolkit.
Okay.
But we're kind of working down through the command line interface aspect of it. Why? Why would we do the command line as opposed to just re-releasing or rebuilding or reshipping the Visual Studio stuff? Where there's this thing running around now called, you may have heard of it, called VS Code.
Yeah, I've heard of that, just a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah, just VS Code. So it's fun to say. The command line capabilities give us the ability to be flexible. So we can build something that works in VS Code to a degree, and we can build something that works in Visual Studio. But to get there, we've got to actually do the foundational work first, and that's what we're doing now.
Yeah. And I guess the DevOps side of things are also there.
Oh, yes.
So if you have it scriptable, then you can do it automate it as well.
That's correct, yeah. So Devops Tasks, we're heavily investing in those. There's actually a whole pipeline of changes in flight and some new components that are going up and down the stack. So the tasks that you see that you interact with are just one half of the story. The other aspect of it is all the API changes that we're doing to support that. So the new admin center, the new capabilities there, those are all actually built on top of that API. So as we harden up that API to support things like backup restore, new environment create with instance management, things like that, those begin to surface as available inside the Azure Devops Tasks.
So it sounds like Microsoft is applying the same sort of lessons learned with Azure, where they first created all of the APIs required, and then they put a UI in front of it. They're doing the same sort of approach here. We're going to create the low-level tools first, and then figure out how it's all going to be, how other ways we can utilize those tools as we build upon them.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm a fan of that one.
Yeah. So from the more Visual Studio-centric approach, you mentioned you used to have the Dev Toolkit, and the last year we spoke, there was some vague things you said about it might be coming for, that even works with Visual Studio 2019. Now it's approaching 2020, but anything more to say a year later?
Do I have more to say? There was a moment in time that it became close that we were going to go and invest in that directly. This is why I was a little vague about it, because we hadn't made the decisions. There came a moment in time where we were about to do that, and we stepped back and decided we were going to invest in the component framework first. Why? First off, you guys, the community, have built a lot of good tools around these new things, and the control framework was the newest kid on the block, and there is no tools for it. How do you get started getting the project laid out? How do you build the test framework? How do you interact with that? Now, these are things that we've been working on internally for quite a while, and it's also something that lends itself to a scriptable interface and to VS Code. It's essentially web dev. Yeah. So it's going and building a component and a control, which is different than using C# or a .NET language to go build a plugin. So that was the general decision. That's why we went the way we did. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to go down that path. That is absolutely, still in the radar, still in the cards to do. But we're working out from the command line interface now with the intent that we want to, again, to your point, follow the Azure approach of how to provide a CLI, provide a project system based on a CLI that works with just basic MS build, and then evolves up.
So all the tools that you've been working with are MS build compatible, so that way they can basically fit them into the actual build pipeline then?
Yeah, and we've also been going back through a lot of our ship things. So, for example, the configuration migration tool. We turned around, community said, hey, we really want the ability to script and export, and we really want the ability to script and import independent of a package. So we've now provided that. The next command, or I'll use the term command because that's kind of how we see it. The next directive we received from the community was, geez, it would be really great if we had filtering, and if we had the ability to control how updates work. Now, this is an internal ask as well as an external ask coming to us. And they wanted that as part of an Azure DevOps task. There's a build of the configuration migration tool right now that's in flight that has those features. And assuming it passes testing in the near future, you guys will see it, probably before the end of the year. Before mid-November, if it passes all testing. If it doesn't pass testing, then it'll be towards the end of the year.
This is an update to the configuration migration tool, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. And then what is it going to do differently?
So you'll now have the ability to identify, so in the configuration migration tool today, when you would go through and define what it was you wanted to export, you created a schema. And you said, to use the examples from the sessions earlier, I want to export the account. Okay. Now you had some choices along the way. You could say, hey, if I export the account, I want it to, on import, not run plugins. Okay, because this is the way my data should be, and I don't want it to do anything downstream. Yeah. You also could say, here is how I want to define a unique account. Okay, so typically an account is defined as unique by one of two things, depending on the environment. Either its ID, its record ID, or its name. Now, let's say that you defined uniqueness as account name and 2 or 3 other custom fields. you can specify that on the configuration migration tool schema generator. Now that's all existing. What we've now added is the ability to say only export accounts that meet this filter criteria.
So that filter, will it be like a complete fetch XML or just a part of that, or is it defined in a different way?
It's the query component of a fetch XML. So
Okay.
you don't tell, in a typical fetch XML, it includes both the view and the query.
Yeah.
In this case, all you would do is provide the query.
Okay, but the full query, not just the filter part of the query or something.
Full query.
Full
yeah.
query, great.
And then that in turn filters what comes out.
Yeah. And you mentioned how it should behave on import. So let's say we have account name plus city or something as the identifying fields for an account. Could you say if it already exists, don't touch it, or if it already exists, update it with the fields we got here, or?
Yep. So that's a new setting that we've added on the schema generator. So for the account, you can state, and it's by entity, you can state that on import, if I run into something that is a duplicate. So the typical behavior of the CMT is on duplicate, update. Okay. So now you can make the exporter can make the decision that says on duplicate, skip, and it will skip.
Yeah.
Now,
So you can honor changed data in the target environment.
You can. Assuming you identified or built your filter criteria, specifically your comparison criteria, correctly.
Yeah. Well, if you don't do it correctly, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, there's still some asks that we have coming in from some of our first-party teams about, well, let me make the decision on a record-by-record basis. We're importing, 500,000 records across 30 threads, all in one shot, and you want me to give you a code hook in the middle of that?
Yeah.
I don't know about that. So we're still negotiating a bit on the inside.
Yeah. I spent quite a few years working on tools like this, actually available for XrmToolbox. But what we realized was that you might want this record by record, but not rather you want more granularity in the filtering and the matching. So you would, for instance, say, okay, we do 2 exports of accounts, one with this filtering criteria and the other with another, and say for the first block, import always overwrite. For the second block, import skip. So you could do it like that. Would that be possible to sort of have several stages and you're still using the same entity in and out?
Yes, but that would be different imports.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you would create a schema that had skip on one behavior with one filter set, create a separate schema, and it's a correlating export configured the other way, and then run them back to back using the tool.
Okay. How about the relationships between records? You import the contact as well, and the account gets a new ID in the target system. Would you do the ID mapping and so on?
That's all preserved.
Oh, great.
And in one of the, actually we preserve the N depth, and it is N depth relationship hierarchy, not just one. That's a feature of the configuration migration tool that's been there for a long time. One of the other lesser known features is that we also deal with duplicate detection records. I saw somebody pop up and say it doesn't do it. Yes, it does do it. It was actually one of the first features we built for it. It will also import application users. It will not import system users, general users, into an online environment. It will try, and it will fail, but it will do application users.
Okay. So finally, how about delete? I have this set of records exported from my source environment. I imported the target environment. Any existing records that don't match according to my matching criteria should be removed.
No,
No.
we don't do that. That is a feature ask that's come up a couple of times, and I guess I just need a little bit more pushing on that. And that feels really, really scary to me.
Yep.
Mainly because if I let that happen, if we did that, if we gave the ability for that switch to be thrown, what could net happen is we go and wipe out an entity.
Yep.
And all of and if that entity is wired up with cascading relationships, we create this cascading delete operation that happens in the environment that is unfortunate and in some cases non-recoverable.
Yep.
So it's restored from backup at that point.
I guess we should say also to anyone listening that the example with exporting, importing accounts is not really viable. This is for configuration data or for setting up the system, not for business data.
Yeah, the tool is limited. It isn't. It is not intended to be a general import-export utility.
No.
It's always been intended for a configuration management or lightweight test data.
Yeah.
If you're looking for continuous integration, or you're looking for mass data migration, there are several ISVs, several folks in the market that provide those services. Our own services group does that. You can set up an SSIS capability to do that.
For data flows.
You can do it with data flows. Absolutely. You can certainly do that. A lot of capability in the marketplace already to do it. But this tool is not for that. This tool is really built around configuration migration.
Matt, you mentioned something that sounds like magic to me. I don't know if I can believe it. So you said there's a way to not run any plugins on create of these entities?
Yes, there's.
Is that something that's... How does that happen?
On import, we identify all plugins associated with a particular given entity, and then specifically all steps associated with that entity,
Just
and
deactivate
them
Okay.
for the life of that run. That is the way it operates today. It is our intention in the future to have it operate in a different way that I'm not quite ready to talk about.
When you say life of the run, I'm using air quotes here for those that can't see, you're meaning that you just turn those off, do your work, and then turn it back on? Or
That's
is there
correct.
something that's only that one connection has those plugins enabled?
No, it turns them off on the server.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
it does not turn them off on the connection at this time.
So it's not magically turning that off for just that one
Yeah,
connection. It's
magic.
turning it off for the server automatically, which is nice, but you have to be aware that if there's something that you expect, if there's something else going on in those records, again, it counts as a bad idea probably, but if you have something else going on that you do need those plugins running, you need to make sure it's scheduled at a time they don't count.
Exactly. And this is also why we've really strongly stated that it is for config.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a general migration tool.
Have you seen it being used as a migration tool?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess you got metrics of everything.
Not as much as you'd like. That's actually something that we implemented for the CLI, is the ability to collect telemetry on its use, and we're now moving into the other tool sets. But it will be something we'll be able to monitor a bit more closely in the future. And of course, for those folks that are nervous about telling Microsoft anything, you can turn the telemetry off. But the intent is of the telemetry we're adding to our tools is to help us understand what buttons are being clicked, what volumes of things are being moved around, how long do things, what's the error rate, what's the success rate, those sorts of things within their scope.
So speaking of telemetry, is anything happening to the plugin trace log, like logging to other or the other destinations, app insights, or anything we should know, get to know?
Nothing to talk about publicly yet.
Okay. So I
yes.
interpret that as something is happening.
Oh yes, something is happening.
Afterwards, feel free to share that privately to us.
Maybe. But yeah, there is considerable thinking and stuff going on in that space.
Okay. Great.
I've been dealing with a really large Canvas app for the last 3 weeks, and dealing with trying to manage probably 5,000 lines of code within the Canvas app.
What?
Yeah, low code is not, it doesn't feel very low code, that's for sure. And the tools to work with it are very poor in that sense as well, because by default you have one line that you can drag down and do that, but even like you can't go down with the arrow key to go down to the next line, because now all of a sudden it tries to do autocomplete and it selects the next item autocomplete, you can't get out of it, all that kind of fun stuff. Are there more, and you have to be online and connected, are there any tools or any features that are coming to improve the people that are putting maybe more code than they should in the Canvas app?
Or you found someone who was a little crazy with macros.
I found someone who was a little crazy with about everything you could do with it. Yeah. So
We've run into those people in Excel too.
okay.
The short answer is yes, there's stuff coming. There's a number of ways that we can deal with that today. If the Canvas app is solution aware, you can extract it. It does come out as part of a solution, and when you run through Solution Packager, it does take it apart and show it to you.
So the solution packager exe will extract out the Canvas app to what?
Today, it extracts it out as the MS app file, I believe.
Which is a zip file, so
is a zip file,
we
right.
cannot really do anything with
In
it.
the
You
future,
can. I'll tell you that later.
I'm going to air quote that. In the future, it will actually break it out into its components, and you'll be able to see it.
Oh, yeah. I know there's a strong request for that.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah, you know, this
if you want to say you have a solid ALM around Canvas,
Correct. Yeah,
I mean,
we have to be able to source control it. We have to be able to diff it. You have to be able to identify it. Those are all the paramount or base table stakes of dealing with.
and just as a
anything like that.
tip there, when you start doing the extracting the MS app files, make sure you don't have noisy diffs.
there's a lot of work to be done because
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of noisy diffs that I've had to deal with in my Canvas app packager to deal with that.
We've been focusing in right now on the general solution system and cutting that down.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of neat features coming in there. There's a bunch of neat optimizations coming in there that'll slow a lot of that down.
And you will, of course, support also packing. So you can actually you work with your Canvas apps in VS Code or whatever to update the scripts, and then you repack it and upload somehow.
I don't want to say we would allow you to work with the functions language in VS Code yet. It would be more of a diff mechanic.
Okay, so more or less to view it, to see what happened.
Yeah. The whole function subsystem in the Canvas area works with the maker surface. So all the IntelliSense, everything about it is extremely contextual. So it has everything to do with what the system can touch at that moment in time. I mean, the general concept of a var is sort of the way it is in the Canvas environment. So when you define a variable, what makes that variable something has to do with what it's connected to.
Yeah.
Okay, so doing that offline is a bit challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would only be for the UI experience, because as Darren mentioned, the little one line where you write your code, air quotes again, or expanding it, and the editor.
Does that language have a name that we use for Canvas apps?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does it have a public name? I guess?
It's the PowerApps functions language. I mean,
PowerApps function.
Yeah,
language.
we refer to it as the functions language.
Functions language. Okay. It's hard to search for things online because it's like, what am I searching for? How to do this and that? But
so there's a whole the language is documented. All the functions capabilities are very well documented, and the team is very diligent about it. As they add new capabilities, they do addendums to the documentation at the same time. That's one of the things I actually really like about it.
Yeah.
Is the team's on top of that.
It is way more documented than anything I've ever done. It's really, I don't have any complications with the document. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find, like, so for example, the if statement, I didn't realize, I can just keep on adding extra commas to it and it'll do more comparisons after that as the else's. I didn't realize that.
Yep.
But, I'm searching for else, and else is kind of hard to search for in a document.
There's lots of else, yeah.
Yeah, so,
so coming back to just the general tools aspect, some other things that you'd said that you were interested in understanding as far as things that we're doing. Let's just talk about the general API and the SDK. Let's talk about the SDK specifically. A couple of things that are going on in the SDK right now, and we've started letting the MVP community know, and we're starting to talk a little bit about it more broadly. We're following that methodology that we typically use when we start signaling that we're going to change something. And then we signal some more, and then we signal some more, and then we deprecate it, and then we move on. So this is something we've started signaling to the MVP community. We've actually been working on it since fall of last year, and it is the eventual deprecation, not yet, the eventual deprecation of the WS Trust authentication protocol. Now, to most of your listeners, that probably doesn't mean anything.
Well, to one of the hosts as well.
Yeah, it doesn't mean much to me either.
Yeah, so
what
it means is anytime you log in with a username and password and nothing else, you're using the WS Trust protocol. Okay. Typically, you would do that with the organization service proxy. So you would use, if you're using the CRM service client, using a connection string, and you'll see it as auth type Office 365 with a UID and a password. If you're using the organization service proxy, you would see it as you would have the URL, and then you'd have the user account and password. Okay. That authentication type under the covers uses a authentication stack and technology stack from Microsoft that is quite dated. And we are in the middle of moving it on. It is being retired. Now, that is not something that's going to happen right away. It's something that we've been slowly marching towards internally for quite a while. To give you an idea, in 2016, we provided the ability to log in to the API using a token, okay, a JWT token. The proxy type is called Organization Web Client, I believe, is what the type. So you have Organization Service Proxy and you have Organization Web Client. An organization web client only took a header token, a JWT token. So we put it in way, way back then. All of our tools actually shifted over to using that technology in the 2016-17 timeframe. So everything that we've been shipping has moved over to it. All of our APIs, all of our SDKs, our PowerShells, all of it has shifted over to it. And the reason we have to move ourselves before we ask you to move, the reason is that that is married to that less secure authentication protocol. And it's not secure, it is less secure than the JWT-based token flows. Now, AAD, Azure Active Directory, is helping, air quotes, helping us along here by introducing a feature called Disable Legacy Authentication. Okay. What Disable Legacy Authentication does is make the user account password flows not work. You have to go through an MFA flow. You have to go through a flow that presents a pop-up to the user that allows them to enter their account credential and in a secure site. Okay, so the idea of being able to have a connection string that has a user account and password that you're sticking in a server someplace and not securing, we're trying to move that away. Now, in the case of our tool set, if you take the CRM Service Client, under the covers, the CRM Service Client has been doing this for a while. Inside the CRM Service Client, which is our client library for talking to the SDK, it's a helper library, you can think of it as. We actually translate or work between the organization service proxy, the organization web client, and the web API. So when you log in and start using it to run retrieves, executes, call commands, we're actually smoothly moving between them based on what you're doing. Okay. Insofar as the authentication stack, in the future, we'll be putting an update out that takes the Office 365 authentication type and remaps it to OAuth. Okay, internally, won't require you to change code. You'll be incented to change code in the fact that we want you to not have that user account and password written into a machine someplace or into a less secure store location.
Yeah.
Now, in support of that, we often question, why does a person use a user account and password in an SDK login?
Because it's easy.
Because it's easy, and because when you think about connecting your console app, your web application, or something else, the idea of a user is easy to work with.
Yes.
Okay? The philosophy that we've put forth with that is the application user concept. So we've had this for a while. We call it a service principal user. Inside the Power Platform, you can create a service principal, or I should say correctly, you can create a service principal user and register that inside your Power Platform environment and permission it just like you would any other user. Now, that user has to be created in AAD inside your tenant, or you can create a multi-tenant service principal. So if you're a partner, you're listening to this, and you want to provide an application that works across tenants, you create a multi-tenant service and use that service identity to be JITted or authenticated into a customer's environment with their consent. Now, one of the deficiencies that we had in this feature, and we've had this feature for a while, one of the deficiencies we had is that in our CRM Service Client and a couple of other places, the only thing we supported was application ID and certificate. And certificates are scary. At the end of the day, that's the easiest way to describe it. Certificates are scary. We were asked repeatedly to provide a service principal application, or a client's ID, client secret capability. We've now delivered that. So as of the 9.1 NuGet packages that we're shipping, they fully support client's ID, client secret authentication flows specifically for that. Prior to that, we'd also shipped the ability to offload authentication from the CRM Service Client itself. So if you wanted to do a three-legged auth for your website, you were standing up your own website, and you wanted the user to log into that and then proxy that authentication through to a service in the background. That's a three-legged auth, or an on behalf of authentication.
That's what you see in most websites where you're actually logging in as a Microsoft account or logging in as a Google account, but it's to the other account. Yes.
Yep. So we've supported that for quite a while using that external auth hook, and we continue to support that. I realized in discussion the other day with somebody that I thought we had documented that. We haven't. So that's something that we will likely provide a sample for and document for you guys who want to do websites. It's, it was one of those duh moments. Doesn't everybody know how to do this? So that's kind of the critical thing. And that's essentially, if you're using today Organization Service Proxy, you need to look at Organization Web Client or move over to the CRM Service Client.
Yeah.
It isn't a big deal. I mean, I have people who like, oh my God, that's like years of coding effort to go fix. The Organization Web Client and the Organization Service Proxy and the CRM Service Client are all iOrganization services.
Yeah.
They implement all the base functionality. Change it to use the interface. Switch over from using Org Service Proxy to use the iOrganization Service interface. Problem solved. Yes, I recognize that there's some work, but it isn't like a devastatingly huge amount of work. At least, I certainly hope it's not.
So when you are documenting the things, will you also provide samples? Okay, this is step by step, how to go from Org Service Proxy to...
We do that. In fact, if you look at a lot of our samples don't actually use the proxy anymore. Anything that's in the PowerApps sample repos shouldn't be using the proxy. They should all be using the interface.
Yeah. But then you see the new pattern. I guess most that are to do this transition, that go find all Org Service Proxy in my code, need to know, okay, what do I need to do? So I think that would be really helpful as well.
That's fair. I mean, we can provide a couple of, maybe a video or a quick edit on what to do.
Yeah.
It is a bit more complicated than what we've had to do in the past when we got rid of the ACS authentication, where it was just a DLL replace, because folks have extended based on it. It's also why if you've ever used the CRM Service Client and you see that it does actually emit or have a Organization Service Proxy and an Organization Web Client, but if you look at our docs, we say never use them.
Yeah.
We left them there as a public property, mainly because we didn't want to have to rewrite or resurface a whole bunch of things. In retrospect, that was a mistake. And we will at some point go back through and interface everything that needs to be interfaced, and deprecate those deprecate those properties. But we haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Virtually every client I've been at has at least some EXE app they have running and some scheduler to go and connect to CRM and to update something or fix something or import something.
Yep.
And then so right now, if they're using a connection string with a user ID and password, then that's going to have to get changed.
It will have to get changed if they're not using CRM Service Client.
Okay.
So assuming that they're using CRM Service Client and then they keep updating to the current drop, we'll fix it for them internally.
Okay. So as long as they're using CRM Service Client, the DLL, the class,
yeah.
As long as they're using that to and use that connection string with that class, they'll be okay going forward.
Right. We will change it from the user account password to an OAuth connection, and we'll use an app ID that essentially we know that it's somebody who didn't do this. Okay. It's a sample app ID that we understand it to be. Now, that said, if a customer is doing that, let's just go through the scenario where you've got a customer or a person you're working with that has an XE that requires user account and password. And the customer's security team, I'm assuming that there's someone who's actually paying attention to the security side of the house, says Microsoft said, disable legacy authentication. Okay, that code will, that application will break when they disable legacy authentication. Now, why? The reason is that even though it's using OAuth, it's still using a user account password flow. And legacy authentication, disabling legacy authentication requires that you come through a secure interface to create or to provide that credential data. It also, it generally gets paired up with enabling MFA, multi-factor authentication.
So that flag is set at in AD then?
Yep.
In Azure AD then?
Yep, that's part of the conditional access system.
Is flipped in there, then no matter what you're doing, if you have a user ID, normal user ID and password and a connection string, you just done broke it.
Yep, it's broke. Okay. Right. And you've got to switch over to using, the fix is switch over to using an application ID.
Which is still a connection string
still connection string
available to do that.
Yep.
So it's just, all right, go and create your application with the application ID. And
get it created in the environment and permission it correctly, and then transition it. And seriously, it is a bad pattern to be using a named user for an app like that.
Yep.
Okay.
But it's so easy.
It is very easy until that entity leaves the company or their password rolls or something happens like that. I mean, there's all sorts of things AAD is doing that are trying to secure your environment. They're trying to help you be more secure. They're trying to help you not do bad things that are going to get you into trouble indirectly or directly. And those patterns, as they build controls and whatnot to enforce those patterns, that impacts downstream. So the patterns that we've been preaching for years, use service accounts, do this, do that, those are starting to become really important because we're now pushing the actual control side. And generally, those are two different populations. You've got the consumer population, the developers who are just, I got to do this job, I got to get it done. And then you've got IT that's like, we need to be secure. They don't talk to each other. And one breaks, and IT breaks dev. So that is please do that. As far as those folks who are going to come back and say, wow, the CRM service client still only supports 8L22, whatever. Oh my God, would you guys ever get your butts together and actually move up? We did. Woo. Yep. 9.1 plus supports 8L 3.1 plus. With a caveat, I'm going to air quote caveat. You have got to start with 8L 3.19 forward. Okay. The recommendation that we're going to give you is use 8L 5.2. We're not enforcing that yet. Specifically, if you're using web applications, you're actually building a website. We really strongly encourage you to use 8L 5.2. But that you have that flexibility. And we inside the CRM service client really spent a bunch of time trying to deal with all the various changes that the 8L code base has made between the 3.19 release and the 5.2 release. And there were 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 that we literally have to do different things when we move up. So if you're doing this on your own and you're using the external authentication flow, or you're using the organization web client and you've written your own 8L wrapper, go to 5.2, start with 5.2.
I'm both sad and impressed that you have all the version numbers memorized.
That gives you an idea of what we've been testing.
Yes, that's the sad part about it. But you've had to go through and do all that stuff, and I think that's another reason that I have so many people that are like, no, we don't want to. We want to have our own connection to CRM and not use the SDK. And I'm like, well, are you using C#? Yeah, well, Microsoft's doing all that work for you. Why are you not taking advantage of it? I don't understand. But one thing they are talking about sometimes is, hey, we want to use .NET Core, and are we getting any closer to the .NET Core world being compatible with the SDK from CRM?
We are not ready to talk about that just yet. I will say that we've been working exceptionally closely with the .NET Core team, and the efforts that team has done for us specifically around .NET Core 3 are extremely appreciated.
So there's not a lack of desire on the Dynamics side of it. It's just getting some things to get supported in the actual core itself.
Yes. So with the release of .NET Core 3, which released 2 weeks ago, I think, from when we're recording this, the base things that we needed to get done are all there. We've been working with them over the last year and a half to get all the fundamentals that we needed in there. So now it's really a matter of resourcing it and getting it done on our side. So, but no time frame just yet. But it is top of mind. There's a lot of internal projects that we're doing that are quite literally, they're built on .NET Core, and we want to move forward with our SDKs being in there. There's a lot of upwelling support to get it done. It's just a matter of resourcing right now.
Because I believe when that's done, then that might mean a core version of the XRM Toolbox, which might mean that people can use their Apple computers without having to have an RDC somewhere. So that goes to everyone thinks Microsoft is an evil corporation that doesn't do things to help other people.
A little bit of a tidbit, one of the devs that works on the tooling platform is a diehard Mac person. So yes.
So there are people even fueling the flames inside of the team itself.
Yes,
so yes. That's cool. That's good news for all those. It could be a nice birthday present for some developers out there to do that. Just in case you're wondering, but I don't.
Are you a closet Mac person?
I am not actually. No.
You sure?
I'm not. I'm 100% positive. I'm not a Mac person. But
so would it help for the Linux guys then? I know certain Norwegians would be having
Linux. I know. I think CRM Viking got his own Linux computer.
Yeah.
And I was like, well.
And then he complains nothing works.
Yeah.
Well, Windows doesn't work either.
Windows doesn't work on Linux.
No.
Okay. But it is. We're not blinded to Windows. Let's just be clear. We're not blinded to Windows. Getting into .NET Core unlocks a lot of doors for us, and we recognize that. We want to get there. Mm-hmm. We do have a number of partners that are not Microsoft based, and feel limited by working with the Web API and having to write a bunch of stuff around the Web API. We understand that, and it is a motivator to do this. But again, as I said, it's really a resourcing matter at this point.
We've gone on for about 40 minutes here, Matt. Every time you come here, I'm again reminded of just how much knowledge is in that head. And if you ever decide you want to do like a weekly podcast, and let's do that. Let's get on it. You've got better things to do. But I do very much appreciate you spending the time talking to us today and throughout the course of our working relationships and reaching out to them. So thank you as a personal thank you in person, which I don't get to do a whole lot. So that's awesome.
Happy to help.
Yeah.
Concur.
Yeah, happy to be here.
If anyone has any questions for you, Matt, is there a way that you would make yourself available, or are you trying to say is this kind of like when production is down and you're saying don't bother me, I'm getting it fixed? Like is that more where your role's at, or where are you at?
No, I spend a lot of time talking to the community. I spend a lot of time watching boards. I don't respond as much as I used to, mainly because at the end of the day, it is a team. Mm-hmm. And the broader the knowledge is shared, the better.
And the team's gotten a lot bigger in the last 8 years.
It's gotten a lot bigger, yeah.
So you got more people to help you out in that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But I'm generally watching most of the time. In the situation where folks actually have a challenge or need to get a hold of me, there's a number of ways to do it. I mean, you guys can reach out to me directly. It's mbarbour@microsoft.com. Yes, I know I just put that in our podcast, but it's not hard to figure out what my
that was going to be my guess if I had to guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's either Matt B or M. Barbour. Yeah. But I also, of course, I'm always on the MVP list, so as it comes up through there, I watch Stack Overflow a lot. I look at the experience site. I look at the community sites on MSD. Well, it's not MSDN anymore, but on the Dynamics community sites, I spend a lot of time reading the posts there. A lot of times I don't respond. Sometimes I hand it off. Ergo, I think it was on the UG community site, the big conversation that was going on with Shan and Gus and other folks there. But I was a spectator on that one.
It was a good thread.
It was a great thread.
It was about managed and unmanaged solutions.
Yeah, it was a great thread. But I mean, those things are that's what I do. And then I come to places like this conference and talk to people and listen a lot, listen to what folks need.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I really love it. I mean, it happens so many times in these conferences that suddenly there's Matt Barbour in the back seat in the room there. And the speaker starts shaking and sweating a bit more.
That is not my intent. I do actually try to sneak into some just to listen.
Yeah.
But usually the session ends with everyone looking backwards to that chair on the back.
Yeah, there's usually at least one or two questions. They're like, "Oh, Matt's back here. Okay, I bet you can answer that one for you."
Yeah.
So
I try.
We appreciate that.
Yeah. So that's how to get a hold of Matt, and we now have his email address, so you can feel free to sign him up for certain advertising. He'll appreciate that, I'm sure.
We have very strong filters. So
okay, all right.
Works pretty well.
Yeah, well, good. That's good. So if people want to get a hold of us, Jonas, how do they do that?
Well, they reach out on Twitter @XrmToolCast or send an email to cast@xrmtoolbox.com.
Awesome. Well,
you know what, Daryl?
What?
This is the first time we've recorded an episode in the same room.
It is.
Yeah.
You and I, yes.
Live
this
meeting.
Pesky Atlantic Ocean between us that separated us from things.
So, the pond?
The pond.
Yeah, Atlantic Pond.
The pond,
Atlantic Pond. So, yeah. It's great actually being able to talk to you.
Likewise.
Maybe it works better. Maybe we don't even video chat. Maybe we should think about that.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, anyway, not that the users care, but anyway.
Yeah.
All right, well, again, Matt, thanks for coming, and thank you to our listeners. Hopefully that was as enjoyable for you as it was for us.
It was great fun. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thank you.
If you have any questions for Jonas or I, or suggestions for future episodes, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com or tweet to XrmToolCast.